All right, so this is just my rough estimate on the entire interior Titanic flooding timeline from the impact of the iceberg at 1140 to the sinking. You can see all of the different decks. I'm going to go through the entire thing. I had to, unfortunately, really zoom in the ship, so I can't show like the grand staircase. I might do another video, talking about when the grand staircase got flooded, when the swimming pool was flooded, rooms like that. But I had to zoom it in really far just so I could get the time, not blocking the rooms. Because if it was zoomed out, you really couldn't tell what is what. That's why I had to zoom this in so much. But you can see kind of the impact zone all the way down in the cargo holds. If you've seen the movie, you would know where the impact zone was, kind of where they stored that car, things like that. It was the cargo holds 1, 2, and 3, boiler room 6, boiler room 5, and the uneven flooding of the cargo holds 2 and 3 due to a pipe tunnel separating them into different sections caused a 5-degree port list just a few minutes into the sinking. The initial impact was 1140, and just taking a look at the diagram, you can see how the water spread from the impact zone, right around where the X's were, where the hole was created, and water rushed in, and you can see how the flooding happened there all the way into the bunkers just a few minutes later. The list was not depicted in the movie, so a lot of people don't even know it existed. And then about 15 minutes after the initial impact, G deck started taking on water. This is kind of the male area. This was the first deck where there were cabins. There were third-class cabins located right in the middle of it, and the cabins started to see water right around midnight. The squash court started to fill through the vents from up under at around 12:05 a.m. And the squash court was a big area, and I'm really intrigued to see someone do a simulation on the squash court flooding just because it is such a giant area. But the first third-class cabin started to flood really early. For reference, the movie Titanic, you saw early on, the third-class cabins flooding. There was water on the ground, and that means those third-class cabins were towards the bow of the ship because those were the first ones to flood right around midnight. That's when G deck started, and then F deck about 15 minutes after that. It was pretty continuous flooding. 15 minutes later, F deck starts to flood. More third-class cabins start taking underwater. More third-class cabins start going underwater at around 12:25 a.m. The Turkish bath section of the deck was reported to start flooding via the stairs coming from the grand staircase landing located on the deck above by the Stuart Wheat at the time period of 12:45 a.m. Unfortunately, from the image that I showed, we cannot see the Turkish baths, but yes, the Turkish baths, in reference to the Titanic flooding, they flooded very early on based on their location towards the front of the ship. And then E-deck takes on water about 15 minutes later. It is a pretty structured flooding. About every 15 minutes, water will reach the next deck. Around 12:30, water reaches E-deck. Water reached the grand staircase landing at 12:35 a.m. and reached the third-class dining room by 12:50. The E-deck grand staircase submerged at around 1:20 a.m., and the flooding of the grand staircase, the lower section of it in E-deck, took about 25 minutes before it was completely submerged. The third-class dining area on E-deck was submerged by 12:40, and then water continues to trickle up to D-deck around 12:45 a.m., starting with the front section of the crew quarters. So the crew quarters were always the first sections to flood on each deck because they were always located towards the bow of the ship. The top of the spiral stairs from the firemen was also located in this area. There were more of the first-class cabins on this deck together with the first-class reception room and the first-class dining salon. The first-class cabins on this deck started to flood at around 1:10 a.m., and you can see some of the first-class cabins right above E-deck, right next to the 1 a.m. marker in D-deck. Those were some of the first-class cabins to actually start taking on water. C-deck starts flooding at around 1:15 a.m. So the flooding took a little bit longer, about 20 minutes from D-deck to C-deck at around 1:15 a.m. And it did house the third-class seating area around 1:15 at the front of the ship. The forward well deck started to submerge at around 1:15 as well, as soon as the port list increased, thus letting the water start to come onto the deck from the left side. And you can see where that would be located right there. Basically, because of the port list, it was shifted over to the left, which enabled water to kind of waterlog the ship to one side even more, created more of an angle. The ship was already at an angle that just increased it even more because water was coming over one of the sides of the ship while the other remained dry. It was tilted up. And then water ends up reaching the front of the ship at around 1:20 a.m., submerging that. Around 1:30, it reaches the B deck first class cabins. It hits A deck about 15 minutes later at around 1:45, and then the boat deck about 20 minutes after that at 2:05. In relation to the movie, the sinking times weren't exactly correct. They weren't completely off. But in terms of like the bow fully submerging, they had it depicted in the movie much, much earlier, I would say, than 1:20, which was the reported time, at least around there. The base of the grand staircase on E deck started to flood around 12:45, while the top of the staircase didn't flood until the very end at around 2:12. And there is some debate on how the flooding of the grand staircase actually happened with the dome breaking. I would surmise based off of its angle, the movie has it depicted a lot higher. I would say the grand staircase had a lot more water in it actually in real life, as opposed to, it basically creating a waterfall as it breaks, as the dome breaks, as the water comes pouring in. Something like that probably happened, but not nearly to the degree, because I'm guessing there was probably a lot more water already in the grand staircase, and the waterfall might have only been like 2 or 3 feet as opposed to what it was depicted in the movie, because the movie had the ship at a much higher angle than it actually was. But those are just some of the times, from impact at 11:40, about every 15 minutes. I just think this is a good visual to show. It's not exactly right. It's more of a rough estimate on when the areas of the ship flooded. Maybe I'll do another one that includes the grand staircase flooding, the swimming pool. This image was originally supposed to include some of that, but again, I had to zoom it in just to make sure you could still kind of see the areas. If I didn't zoom it in, the time of it would just block out every single deck. So that is just the full timeline of that. The ship officially sank completely at around 2:20 a.m. So it was initially hit at 11:40 and it completely sunk by 2:20, with the sinking getting a lot more rapid towards the end. And then, of course, the entire stern section completely imploding due to air pressure. It wasn't even filled up with any water. I wouldn't say these are exactly 1000% accurate, but it is a nice visual to see how long it takes each of the decks to receive water. You're talking about 11:40 initial impact, 15 minutes later it reaches G deck, another 20 minutes later it reaches F deck, E deck another 15 minutes, B deck another 15 minutes, C deck at 1:15, and the ship officially fully submerges by 2:20. You can see it reaches the boat deck at 2:05, and within 15 minutes the entire thing is down. So that is just the kind of recap of at least the bow section flood timeline for the Titanic here in 2023. Guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.